Oh, hey, what's up? I'm John Hansen, FantasyPoints.com, and it seems as if my Minnesota Vikings are in the news here today, trading with the Houston Texans, essentially giving them a second round pick next year to move back up into round number one and getting the 23rd overall pick in the NFL draft. And it does beg the question now, what do the Minnesota Vikings do? I have been a fan of this football team. I'm almost afraid to say a few years away from 50 years of fandom. And over the last 10 years or so, I have talked all kinds of shit on the Minnesota Vikings on SiriusXM, and no one has said a word. Why? Number one, I've been right. And number two, I'm family. I'm allowed to talk about the Minnesota Vikings. I have a long and lucrative history following this franchise. I do actually give them some credit, as I've mentioned a lot on the radio. Number one, they've had a lot of good offensive skill players over the years, and I've been very attuned to the Minnesota Vikings, and I've had some really good calls over the years with Vikings, like the year I ranked Dante Culpepper as my QB3 for the season, despite having 0 starts, and he delivered big time. But it absolutely has been frustrating. There's no question about it. I do also say though that people in Minnesota love fantasy football. Yeah, the weather's bad, but the real reason is we probably know deep down in our hearts we're probably never winning a championship. So we might as well win a fake one. But I'm going to get into what the quarterback history is of the Minnesota Vikings. It's not very good. In their defense, they really haven't had a lot of cracks at good quarterback options. I actually went through over the last 35 years, and I'll do that, explore what they could have done. And they really didn't miss out on much. But let's go way back to December 28th. 1975 for yours truly. And this is where it all began for me as a Minnesota Vikings fan. I was 7 years old. I had an older brother who is 5 years older than me. Him and his friends were fans of the NFL, and they didn't like the Vikings per se, but I just happened to attach myself to them because they were a pretty good team at the time. My mom told me that, they're Vikings, they're Scandinavians. Your last name is Hansen. You're Norwegian. So I kind of like that. And I also, ironically, loved the way Howard Cosell used to just do like Monday Night Football highlights. And I just love the way he used to say, Fran talking 10 2, Ahmad, Ra, shot. Now, years later, I met Ahmad Rashad, told him how I was watching live in 1981 when he had one of the greatest Hail Mary catches of all time. Unfortunately, he kind of rolled his eyes a little bit, but I ended up becoming friends with Fran Tarkenton, and doing a radio show with him 30 years later was really, really cool. But that was my start, December 28th, 1975, 7 years old, playoff game, Dallas Cowboys. They were very good. The Minnesota Vikings were. It was in Minnesota, so they were the home team in the playoffs. They were better than the Cowboys that year. And of course, that was when Drew Pearson pulled a touchdown out of his what with Roger Staubach, thus the game where the term Hail Mary became well known, because that was what Staubach said after the game. He goes, I just threw it up and said a Hail Mary. So quite an ominous start for yours truly as I try and spit it out there. Fast forwarding to 2009, I am in the building at the Superdome as Brett Favre and the Minnesota Vikings are taking on the New Orleans Saints. Only the Vikings can have Adrian Peterson run for like 100, a Hall of Famer, with 3 touchdowns, and hold Drew Brees to under 250 yards. And your Hall of Fame quarterback, Brett Favre, he throws for over 300, and you still lose. I had tickets that year to the Super Bowl. I was going to take my wife on a nice little vacation. Very into the game. I'm sitting in the stands with some Saint fans, getting to know them a little bit, and they were a little downtrodden too. And, very into the game. The Vikings are in Ryan Longwell's field goal range. They take a TV timeout. All the Saint fans around me are like, wow, we're done. It was like, I believe, a 44-yarder. I started thinking, wait a second, am I really going to watch my team make the Super Bowl for the first time since I was 8 years old? right in front of my eyes, and I have tickets to the game. I'm like, nah, that ain't happening. Next play, 12 men on the field, called them back. They opted to throw. Favre throws to pick. We go to OT. They lose. Then a couple of years later, I have Larry Fitzgerald on the radio show, and I'm telling him this story because Larry is a noted Minnesota Viking fan. And his advice to me is, okay, dude, next time we make it, you're not going. I'm like, fair enough. Understood. 2017, the Vikings are in the NFC title game 10 miles from my house, right outside of Philadelphia. And I went to Vegas. You know what happened there? They got their asses kicked again. So I had to tweet Larry. I'm like, there you go, Larry. It's not me. It's not me. So this is why I have been of the opinion, because I've seen the futility just transpire over and over again. So I have been of the opinion, and I've said this on SiriusXM a lot, that the only chance we have in Minnesota is to get a transcendent talent at the quarterback position. In fact, 2 years ago, as I've told the story a couple of times, I was introduced to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the general manager of the Minnesota Vikings. I'm talking to Kwesi, and very nice guy and all that. And I'm like, look, sorry to do this to you, but as a long-suffering Viking fan, I'm sitting here talking to the general manager. I do need to give you my unsolicited advice or opinion, at the very least, as a long-suffering, interested observer. And I told him the whole deal, and he was certainly nice about it. And lo and behold, the very next year, these Minnesota Vikings apparently went all in trying to move up to get Anthony Richardson. And I was all about that. If you listen to me on SiriusXM last February, March, April, I'm like, superstar vibe, big time. Our guy Brett Whitefield really liked Anthony Richardson. He wasn't really raw, as opposed to just didn't get a lot of reps. I mean, he was doing things on tape there at Florida that wasn't very raw. The Vikings apparently, understanding my point, and it's a very obvious point. I'm not saying it's like riveting or anything like that. Everyone knows this who follow the Minnesota Vikings. So, it would be irresponsible for them at this point. We tried it with Kirk Cousins. It's not happening, obviously, and it would be irresponsible for them to not try to go all in to get this quarterback quandary figured out, basically. So apparently the Vikings offered perhaps three number one picks, including their own, in 2023 for Anthony Richardson. That obviously did not happen. But I went back and looked, and the fact of the matter is, these Minnesota Vikings, and this is part of the problem, they're kind of good a lot. They really have not had access to a transcendent talent at the quarterback position. And I went back and looked like 40 years. The Vikings never pick in the top five. That's first and foremost. And if you go back over the last 30, 35 years, most of the good players are top three picks, top five picks. I mean, I wrote down some names here. I mean, you can even go back to Bledsoe and Aikman and Carson Palmer and Eli and Stafford and Luck and Matt Ryan, even. The Vikings have had really no shot to get any of these guys. So the Vikings are in a pretty desperate spot right now. And this trade speaks to me that it's happening. We're going to do something. Question is, what? Do we try to package the picks to move up? So we are now at 23 and 11. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. There's been some word, that they like Drake May. I think we'll take it. We'll take it. I mean, he's not as athletic and mobile as Jaden Daniels, who would certainly be a very good fit for Kevin O'Connell's offense. But I think all Minnesota Viking fans would gladly accept the very talented Drake May, a little inconsistent, but enough athleticism to fit the mold of the modern day quarterback. Or I like this one, actually. I know it's a little ballsy, but I think that more likely they're worried about Sean Payton at 12 usurping them and getting JJ McCarthy, because I do believe, just a hunch, that Sean Payton looks at JJ McCarthy and all the tools that he has, pro style offense. He sees his next Drew Brees. And you could argue, I will argue, JJ McCarthy is a little more physically talented than Drew Brees, who is fairly athletic when he came out, but certainly McCarthy runs better than him, and bigger guy anyway, better arm overall. I don't know if he has Drew's touch timing, anticipation, field vision, and pre-snap recognition and all that stuff, but I think that they want JJ McCarthy, and I think look, there's a little history there, of course, with Sean Payton, Bounty Gate, and all that, which, of course, as I mentioned in this video, was at that damn game, and it was, by the way, ugly. My opinion of Brett Favre on the field improved after that game, but I like that one personally. But it is a little ballsy, and JJ McCarthy may not be transcendent, but dude is a national champion, and there's a lot to be said for that quality, that intangible. But I think we would settle for Drake May. I hate to say settle. Drake May is considered, clearly a top 5 prospect overall in this class, and certainly a top 3 quarterback. I think the one scenario that does scare us, or me as a long-suffering fan in desperate need of a transcendent franchise quarterback, is that they quote unquote settle and go elsewhere at 11, knowing that they could potentially get a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix there at 23. That would be a little par for the course, a little kicking the can down the road. It would pale in comparison to a potential deal, a blockbuster bonanza for Anthony Richardson the year before. They won't have to do something that strong to move up to the top. Well, here's the problem, because we are presuming Caleb Williams, and we're also at 1, and we're also presuming that DC and New England will take a quarterback. So that could be the problem right there in terms of Drake May. I don't know if New England would take McCarthy at 3. They may opt for May at 3, but who knows? No one knows. But that is a little bit of a quandary here. But I think if you could maybe move up to 5, get the Chargers draft spot, do some sort of package deal, give them that extra 1 and maybe like a 3 or a second or something like that. I'm not a big contract guy. At the very least, I think you would secure the services of one JJ McCarthy and keep McCarthy out of Sean Payton's underground lair. That would probably help, but we would sign off on it, or at least this Minnesota Viking fan would sign off on kind of going all in on JJ McCarthy. I would also gladly settle for Drake May, but it's clearly time in Minnesota. Thank you for your service, Kirky. It was entertaining, good for fantasy. You support a lot of good receivers, but we're ready to move on to actually try to win a championship that isn't in fantasy football. Let's win a real NFL championship, these Minnesota Vikings. That is my commentary on this current situation. And I'm John Hansen, FantasyPoints.com. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for liking and subscribing.